Yo, parish orphans and retrogrades, happy Saturday. Today's episode is one that has long been needed on the channel. Sometimes you put off an episode like this, which is called Against the Straussians, because however needful it is to do these to properly inform my audience, you, the parish orphans, it's a lot of people say, well, what the hell is a Straussian? And that's never, even though it's a super fascinating topic, and you're going to see how important the topic is, it is slightly intimidating, because when half of the audience starts out the episode being like, well, I don't know what this is. What is this? What are you doing? I realize that I need to give a lengthy preamble to explain not only, well, here's why the Straussians are bad, but what is a Straussian? What is a Strauss? And it's a big onus. It feels like a big responsibility. I've done it quite a bit this week. I did it with the 14th Amendment. I did it with the First Amendment. Did it with more or less all the shows that we've handled this week. Where did my show paper go? I just had it up here. Sorry, we had a power outage, and everything is just rearranged, which is always dangerous. So with the power outage, made us start a little bit late. Yeah, so all these topics this week, basically, besides the life site, John Henry West and Pope Leo the 14th thing, involves explaining not just the answer to some problematic, but explaining the presuppositions which go into the problematic. It did so on the 14th Amendment, First Amendment. Why does the church actually teach that the Islam-Judaism question is not one about worshiping multiple gods, but rather they're infidels? They do worship the one God, but in a demonic way. It can get onerous, and that's what you come to this channel for. And that's what I'm going to do today, is explain to you not only what is a Straussian. It is the philosophy behind Neo-Conservatism, and it's a lot. As the philosophy behind something, we're saying that it's a much more important Platonic force. It's the idea generative force behind a political movement. It takes its name for a man, Leo Strauss. Some people even call Neo-Conservatism Leo-Conservatism. I think the New York Times has done this. And if you know anything about Washington, D.C., Beltway politics, the late 1970s in the Congress, where you had neoconservatives defect from the Democratic Party to come in to be basically Keynesian war hawks who are liberals, economic liberals, then you understand neoconservatism has been animating the American political discourse since the late 1970s. As always, I care less about politics. I care some about politics as I do about culture, particularly here, academic and intellectual culture, where Leo Strauss, this conspicuous figure, reigns as a kind of unchecked academic hero, shadowy academic hero, that is, I'll say this at the start, the only place where there's a conservative enclave in academia is what's called a Straussian school, a school that is run by the students of this guy, Leo Strauss. Now, Leo Strauss was a German Jew who emigrated to America when he was a grown man. And he had a completely conspicuous view of history and of philosophy and of philology that is marked by, and you can't make this stuff up, esotericism. So what he did, he said, when you read the dialogues of Plato or you read Aristotle, they're speaking in a secret tongue. They're speaking in secret code to other political philosophers. And really, I'll say this in the outset, Strauss says that Plato and Aristotle, neither of them did metaphysics, that the theory of the forms associated with Plato or the theory of hylomorphism, the correct theory of the form, adumbrated by Aristotle, are totally false. he didn't understand metaphysics. Strauss didn't. He admitted he didn't understand the philosophy of Martin Heidegger there when he was still in Germany. And if you can't understand Heidegger, then you can't understand Aristotle, who's far deeper than Heidegger. And he admitted this, but he said really Plato and Aristotle had no metaphysical systems that they really cared about. They developed these complex, in Aristotle's case, metaphysical systems as an esoteric way of conveying ideas of political philosophy. And he says they're speaking in a secret code to others so that they wouldn't get killed like Socrates. This is Straussianism. They say he's a secular Jew, Leo Strauss, who immigrated to America and is making this absurd claim that the master of those who know, Aristotle, had no real metaphysics, no epistemology, and all philosophy. He doesn't believe in the forms. He doesn't believe in timeless, unchanging principles, though he claims to be an anti-relativist. And you're seeing a lot of the font of the self-contradiction entailed by his neo-conservative American students who claim we don't like relativism, but they're not committed Christians. And he couldn't articulate how and why. Well, he was an academic. He influenced a whole class of in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s of not only other academics, and I'll read you a list of academics who are considered Straussians. Harvey Mansfield is one. Mark Blitz is another. Alan Bloom is another. Paul Wolfowitz is another. Thomas Pangel. A lot of these names you'll notice sound like his Jewish last names in academia, and yet it's considered conservative academia. The other aspect of this is he influenced many, many political commentators and many journalists, high-ranking journalists, like Irving Kristol and his son William Kristol, and others who would cover things like the Congress very closely. Even a lot of neoconservatives in the Congress, like Joe Lieberman, remember him, and others who defected from the Democrat Party in the 70s or 80s to combine Keynesian economics with war hawkism. That's what I was saying before when I interrupted myself. They are Leo-conservatives, neoconservatives after the fashion of Leo Strauss. And it's a strange thing because, I'll put it this way, have you ever heard of Hillsdale College? This is a hotbed of Straussian professors and Straussian thought. You've probably been told that Strauss is, that the school, Hillsdale College, is one of the places to send your conservative sons and daughters so they don't have this terrible undergraduate college experience full of anti-Christian and anti-American counterforces. This is troublesome because Hillsdale College is literally a hotbed of Straussian thought. It's false conservatism. It's neoconservatism. They might teach your kids the Federalist Papers. Okay, that's a little bit better than the state college, but they won't teach your kid the Federalist Papers properly. Well, how do you teach the Federalist Papers? And this is a series of dialogues published literally publicly in gazettes, going back and forth from newspaper to newspaper. There were dialogues between and among Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The proper way to read the Federalist Papers is to read them as a dialogue with the Anti-Federalist Papers. Now, they're not going to do that there because the Straussians pitch one view of history, one view of man, one view of government that is anathema to the anti-federalist project in America, which is the truest self of America. Now, that's not my biggest problem with Strauss. My biggest problem with Strauss is he takes the greatest non-Christian philosopher ever, Aristotle, and he says, this guy said he did metaphysics, but that was just window dressing. What he really wanted to do was this crass political philosophy. I'm going to explain it all as I get going, but that's deeply offensive. Plato and Aristotle had no metaphysics. That's absurd. That's what the show's on today. I'm going to try to break this down for you in not overly abstruse, not overly academic ways. But the big takeaway for starters is that Strauss is a pervasive cultural and political force that's meant to be shadowy. So you're meant not to know who Leo Strauss is necessarily. And the force has waned, and he's significantly less influential now than he was in, say, the W. Bush era, when neoconservatism reigned not only American politics on both sides of the aisle, but it reigned geopolitics and the American policing of the world. And so it reigned the world. This is a really, really big thing. And I have some personal interactions with Straussians. Maybe that's how I should begin. But it's not only Hillsdale College that is a hotbed of Straussianism. It's the University of Dallas, which is a Catholic school, has a ton of Straussian professors. So University of Dallas, while I like that it's one of the more faithful, what's that guide called? The Cardinal Newman Guide to Faithful Colleges. I like that, but it's populated, particularly in its political science department, by Straussian professors. And I caution against this. Claremont McKenna, the undergrad place, Claremont Graduate University, is populated almost exclusively by former students of Leo Strauss himself, who taught at the University of Chicago for many years, or students of the more famous students of Strauss, like Harvey Mansfield or others. They're all either students directly of him or grandchildren of his intellectually students of students. There are other schools besides. Even the University of Notre Dame used to have some notable Straussians on their faculty. And it's dangerous because conservatives are told what you're told by, say, Hillsdale. If you want your kid to be safe from the sexual license of, these Jewish universities and basically lose their soul and lose their intellect and be brainwashed, send them to Hillsdale College. The president is a guy named Larry P. Arnn. And there's some compelling things. Your kids are going to read the Federalist Papers here. We're going to have serious dialogues. Well, you have to understand these are Straussian places and what the implications are. So this is not only a show for bashing neoconservatism, Leo-conservatism, but it's also a show cautioning parents and grandparents maybe to think twice. I'm not saying what's what. I'm not telling you what to do, but understand the University of Dallas is a little different from other Catholic faithful colleges because it's got so many Straussians, and you might not even know what this is. They say there's a secret pipeline between Claremont and Hillsdale. These are the two main places, and there's three main types of Straussianism. I'm going to explain that today, but first off, I want to shout a few things out. After that, I'm just going to tell you what my personal experiences with Straussians are. And I've had many because I spent a long time in grad school. And then we'll get into the heart of who Leo Strauss is and what the two main teachings of his philosophy, and then some of the outcomes. That'll be today's show. It's more pervasive and more important than you think. If you find yourself in a blue state, I would say get out of that blue state and get to a red state. You've heard me say it. Go to realestateforlife.org. This is most important. We talked about it in the practical consequences of living in a blue state yesterday. If you're not in the blood red swath of states in the American Southeast, then you're in places that after Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health chose to keep abortion. The only place in this country that once they had their sovereignty, their legislative sovereignty returned to them as little 50 mini republics within a vast consolidated government, they chose to do the right thing. Those were all exclusively southeastern states, which is why I say that's a great tell. And it would be the same tell if they have their sovereignty restored to them on other important moral legislative topics. It will always be the blood red swath of states in the Southeast. So get to a red state here in the Southeast. That's my strong advice to you. My second spin on that is go to realestateforlife.org, and they will help you get here. It's also cheaper in several of these states to buy a house than almost anywhere else. Go, if you'd like to continue supporting this channel, to locals.com, specifically rulesforretrogrades.locals.com, and support me on Locals. It's as direct as I can be. People ask me all the time, how can I support the channel? Subscribe to the channel. And if you have $5 or $10 a month, that's truly the engine, what keeps the lights on around here. We had a power outage today, so for a short while, nothing was keeping the lights on. But it's not just some cliche when people say the show's not possible without you guys. And this week, I've kind of been doing admin cleanup, and looking at the books some, and realizing how important the locals' support is. And as any local will tell you, local supporter of mine will tell you, we've been interacting a lot this week, and that's going to be the norm. Also, after every show, we do a locals only 15 or 20 minutes where we can talk about the juicy stuff and the maybe aspects that YouTube won't let me talk about. So please do support me at rulesforretrogrades.locals.com. The show's truly not possible without your guys' support. And the best way to support, even if it's only $5 a month, is a monthly rolling basis. So we can just say, okay, we can count on this. Even if it's $5 a month from X number of people, then we know we can count on that. Thank you very much. Truly got kicked off of Patreon for refusing to compromise. You guys say you want a right wing and a Catholic influencing orbit that is comprised by people that won't compromise. Those people, like myself, who don't compromise, do still have to eat. We all need money, and I appreciate the help I've got. I've gotten a lot of new support this week, so thank you very much. Finally, if you want to form a matchmaking is the best way to do it. Dating culture has died. By and large, it's dead. Go to timothyjgordon.com. We're really looking for, we've got a great new cohort of men and women in their late 20s and early 30s. We would like to get some people who are 19, 20, 21, 22. If you've graduated high school, that's the time to be looking for your spouse, the best time. Don't make the mistakes of the boomers and Gen X. Get married young, and the scene is rough out there for serious courtship for 19, 20, 21-year-olds. It's not rough if we can get a bunch of like-minded men and women into our closed community at Retrograde Matchmaking. So go to timothyjgordon.com and click matchmaking. We're especially targeting young people. We've got a big new class of 27 to 33-year-olds, men and women, and that's going very well. We'd like to get it even a little bit younger. Okay.
And we also have on your locals, people will specifically ask questions and that sort of thing, or comments for the show's topic. So at some point today, we'll read a lot of your local supporters' comments about today's topic.
This entire episode is brought to you by one of my really bright local supporters who's like, Tim, you will occasionally mention the Straussians. We need an entire show on the Straussians. They're more important in a way than Strauss. So I was going back and forth on how to pitch this show. Do I do a Who is Leo Strauss show, this German Jew who immigrated here, taught at the University of Chicago for a long time, came up with a really cult-like following, which explains the Straussians, and the fact that there are basically 3 types of Straussians. People are always fascinated to hear that. Or do I take a kind of moderate approach where I'm kind of going back and forth between explaining why Strauss is dangerous and why his students are dangerous? I'll put it to you this way. Here's sometimes I don't usually favor the anecdotal, but when I went to do a PhD in Rome, my mentor who oversaw my Tessina, which was going to become my dissertation, Father Kevin L. Flannery, one of the leading Thomists, ethicists in the world, bioethicist, and he's a real serious Thomistic metaphysician, Kevin L. Flannery, Father Kevin L. Flannery. He said, your Tessina is great, but you cite in it Harry Jaffa, this West Coast Straussian. Do you realize, I'm not saying you have to take the citation out because I get that it's saying for this couple of lines, you cite him twice. He's saying exactly what you want to say, and the evidence isn't proof texted. It's kind of correct, and you wanted a citation there. But do you realize the danger of you, Tim, a budding serious Aristotelian Thomist philosopher, citing any kind of Straussian, West Coast, Midwest, or East Coast Straussian? Those are the 3 types. And I said, well, some, but explain it to me. And he did. Well, then Abby was born with, needing several brain surgeries. I got the kind of halfway between a master's and a PhD degree called a PhL, came home, got into law school. And when I was in law school in San Diego, I was like, well, I want to finish the dissertation I chose. Only about an hour away from where I was attending law school was Claremont, another Straussian hotbed of thought. And when I was commuting for doctoral classes, only once a week for 2 semesters, I told 2 of my legal mentors, hey, I'm thinking of doing a PhD at the same time doing the JD. It's at Claremont. And they're like, you're a madman. And I thought they meant doing a PhD and a JD at the same time while I'm, still learning to be a new father to young Abby, who's a neurosurgery patient and had to have a shunt revision by like her 3rd year of life while I was still in law school. And they're like, well, yeah, that's crazy. But no, we mean it's even crazier to fall under the Straussian rubrics. And they're giving me basically the same caution as one of them was my close legal mentor, who's another Catholic, Thomas A.C. Smith, who was in the Reagan admin and is a really good man, really good Catholic man, and just an amazing law academic. Another one was Mike Rappaport, who ran the Originalism Center, who's a good man, a great scholar, well-known to a good friend of Justice Scalia. These are accomplished people. One was like a personal friend of Justice Scalia, the one that turned me on to Philip Hamburger's book. We were all joking about that. That's Rappaport. He's a Jewish legal academic. And then Thomas A.C. Smith. And they both said the same thing that my would-be doctoral dissertation advisor had said to me: be careful with the Straussians. What's up? And as I was looking at my intellectual influences in those days, this is 2009, 2010, what I realized, it reminds me of a scene in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles where Splinter is talking to the kid Danny, and Danny's sympathetic with Splinter, and Splinter's just told him that Master Shredder is his. This is a terrible example, I'm realizing as I've dived into it. He's telling him Shredder is his enemy, Orokusaki, and then he's like, oh, where did he go? And he's like, I don't know, but you're wearing his insignia on your headband. And they're like, oh.
I think that's a great example.
Yeah, it's kind of dope as far as rats go. Well, we're talking about Leo Strauss.
Respect
for Splinter.
That guy was like a father to many of us.
Yeah, he's like the Asian rodent grandfather I never had. But I'll say this much. I felt a little bit like that when in 2009, 2010, I'm like, you're telling me the same thing that Father Flannery was telling me in 07, 08. So 07, 08, 09, 010, all 3 of my academic mentors are telling me caution for Leo Strauss and his followers. It's not a thing it's fine to cite Harry Jaffa. It's not something you want to do much, though, as a serious scholar, because Strauss destroys serious scholarship and he cheapens it with Neo-Conservatism. The reason I was blind and I was like Danny wearing the insignia of a Rokusaki, you know him as Shredder, the terrible, terrible menace in the real world known as Shredder.
Very serious business.
Is because it was a time of Neo-Conservatism. I mean, we were just coming off the Bush years. I'd just come off being a kind of political normie. I didn't really even know what Neo-Conservatism was. I had a little bit of an inkling. I didn't know how much W. Bush was the pinnacle of Neo-Conservatism. I thought it was like Irving Kristol and Joe Lieberman, but they basically do represent the W. Bush agenda. So I was blind to it, not to mention that throughout the time I was in Rome, all throughout the time I can't remember when I got into the Claremont Review of Books. I would read it cover to cover. George W. Bush claimed he read the Claremont Review cover to cover every time it released a quarterly episode. It's a big magazine. It's really nicely done. It's supposed to be the conservative pushback against the New York Review of Books, and they get good scholars and they get good topics, and I loved it. And it influenced my thought adversely toward not seeing the toxins of Straussianism and latent Neo-Conservatism. That I would read it. Remember that, Steph? I had a stack of them, the CRBs.
Screen right now. These are the Claremont Review of Books. They're huge. They're actually like, it's like bigger than a newspaper. They're actually quite large. But we still have a big stack of them in our closet right now.
Combining culture, politics, and philosophy. Ways like Eric Voegelin and Harry Jaffa and a bunch of Jaffa's West Coast Straussian students, and Michael Zuckert was a Midwestern Straussian and a bunch of his students, from Notre Dame, and Alan Bloom is a famous East Coast Straussian, a bunch of his students. They'd all be kind of take turns writing, and I only started realizing through their coverage of the 14th Amendment that something is really, really wrong with these guys. Something is really, really wrong with these guys. And then when I was told by my third academic mentor, Mike Rappaport, Thomas A.C. Smith, and Father Kevin L. Flannery, watch out for them. Don't cite them in white papers. And it's not just a cover your butt kind of thing. It's serious scholars realize that Strauss turns to ash whatever he touches. And it's because of his philosophy. Right. Then I started, and I think it was actually a conversation I had in Michael Rappaport's office when I was essentially clerking for him, going through minute by minute for him for a summer's work. Every line of the Richmond ratification debate, where all these famous Virginians were going over whether or not to ratify the U.S. Constitution from, I think, June 3rd to June 24th, 1788. Very, very, very critical summer. The summer of 1788. Would America be a country or not? It wasn't decided in 76 or 81, 82 when the war ended with Great Britain. It was decided between the summer of 1787, where they shuttered the windows and illegally got rid of the Articles of Confederation and brought in this new, which required unanimity, and they couldn't get unanimity to bring in this new constitution. And they brought it in. And then they just said, take it back to the 13 states, see if we can get 9 to ratify it. And then each state had its own capital, its ratification convention. I was going through by far the most important state with Michael Rappaport, and we had this conversation one summer afternoon when I was delivering him my notes on Strauss. And I'm like, okay, I keep hearing this. And he said, well, there's a few people you should talk to about this guy. And I did. There's a professor at San Diego Law that would kind of go back and forth, and I won't say his name, but it's dangerous. And then I took 2 classes at CGU, at Claremont Graduate. One was Plato's Sophist and Statesman, 2 of his mature dialogues where he is articulating the theory of the forms as maturely as Plato can. You guys know what I think of Plato. But I thought Strauss was doing even Plato dirty, and he was. It was taught by Professor Mark Blitz. And another class was called the Senate, what is it? The Cool and the American Senate, where it's all about, and that was taught by Professor Joe Bassett, who co-authored the death penalty book with Ed Feser. Joe Bassett did. You often forget Ed Feser co-authored that one. And that was on the American Senate. Both of them have a strong Straussian filter, Blitz more than even Bassett, on their view of history. And I realized who was in those classes with me. So I think I was literally seated in Mark Blitz's class in between Kathleen Arn, nice girl, but Larry P. Arn's daughter, president of Hillsdale, and she had strong. Once you wake up, you can't unsee what you're doing. You're like, wow, Hillsdale and Claremont, these are supposed to be like the two. Secular academia, the 2 most conservative places you can send your kids to college, but they're hotbeds of Straussian thought. And then I was seeing, because this is after I'd been in Rome and I was really well trained in Aristotomist metaphysics. It was all fresh. I was seeing, there's a problem here. They're not doing real philosophy. Strauss didn't do real philosophy. He said all real philosophy, which is metaphysics and epistemology and ethics, reduces to political philosophy, which is a form of relativism, even though he claimed he hated relativism. So it's very strange. And I'm sitting next to Kathleen Arn, And many of the West Coast Straussians fashioned themselves Thomistic Straussians, which is a contradiction in terms. You can't say that the forms don't exist and that quitative essence doesn't exist. It's all just politics, without being Glaucon or I don't know, Democritus or Nietzsche or something like that. That's not Thomism. That doesn't blend like that. And that's really all Leo Strauss was teaching these people. Well, I'll go through the difference between the three types of Straussians in a second. But you know, Kathleen Arne is the daughter of one of the famous Midwestern Straussians. And I started holding kind of court outside of Mark Blitz's class and trying to pull these kids out of the matrix. But the person who sat to my right, well, I'm always forgetting her name. She's in the Trump administration.
The lesbian.
Yeah. What's her name? I forgot it the other day, then remember. Some people's names I just always forget, then remember. The lesbian in Trump's admin.
Let me look it up.
Pretty well known.
I'm gonna literally just type in lesbian.
There's so many. That's
Trump,
the problem.
in Trump.
I have her face in my head right now. That sounds weird, like I'm a cannibal or something. But I can picture, I have the phantasm for her face in my head. Tammy Bruce. I mean, sounds like a lesbian. Right? If it sounds like a lesbian and looks like a lesbian, yeah. Tammy Bruce. And it was like a moment I'll never forget. You got, the daughter of an American conservative who's pretty famous, gets 3 shout outs every time Mark Levin was doing his show. And Mark Levin was at the height of his popularity. Gets a shout out, Hillsdale College. Well, that's Larry PR, and his daughter's right here being further indoctrinated into what her dad has told her is the correct view of the world. And since it's got this conservative tincture, liberals are bad. They're pitching it as like, we're the conservatives. It sounds really compelling. And this girl thinks, hey, I'm doing the thing. I'm part of that. I'm part of the red pill. I'm a conservative in academia. My dad's a conservative in academia. No, he's a neoconservative. Neoconservatives are not conservative. He's a Leo Straussian. He's a neocon. And Tammy Bruce is this kind of big machine Republican, lesbian Republican commentator. That's also, all this Straussianism is just fitting right into her categories. So, by the way, in that Blitz class, I wrote a paper on the sophist and the statesman. I have a friend, Dr. Nick Barber, who I went through Claremont I went through Loyola Marymount with in grad school, and we were friends. He's one of the smartest dudes I've ever met. What's up, Nick Barber, if you ever watch this? And he's a Plato scholar and just a probably legit 150 IQ. No stretch, if I had to guess. And so I consulted. I was like, look, I'm an Aristotomist. I think Platonism's something of a joke, but let's go through this. And he's like, well, here's what the sophists and the statesmen are really on. You can't explicate false logoi. It is the most mature. He had kind of agreed with me. It's the most mature that Plato's real theory of the forms can get. It is not about demagogy. If anything, in Plato's being esoteric, we'll talk about what this means in a second. And he's using a fake pretext to talk about a deeper thing. Plato's talking in those two most mature dialogues, late dialogues, as we say. He's talking about politics, coarse politics, as a way to talk about what he thinks the true metaphysical fabric of the world is, the forms. And it is more nuanced than the places that Plato articulates his view of the forms later. But so I go through and I say, in the sophist, it's this, in the statesman, it's this. Straussianism is bullshit, is what I put into my paper for Mark Blitz, but it was a really strong one, and my friend Dr. Nick Barber helped me to put that together. And Mark Blitz said, "Look, I have to give you an A because this is an account of Plato that is deeply Platonic. It's actually, you made me realize some things. Even if Plato's wrong, he was not esoterically making up this complex theory of the forms just to talk political philosophy. That's absurd. That's what Leo Strauss and the Straussians taught and believed, respectively. Nonsense." So he's like, I have to give you an A, but obviously I'm a Straussian. I'm completely committed to this esoteric view of the world, which says that the philosophers do philosophy, and they cite like Avicenna, Averroes, and some of the other Muslim philosophers to say they did this. Maimonides, the Jewish Aristotelian, they had to write in a certain way so they could really talk about political philosophy without getting killed. I'm like, number one, that's not very noble. If your number's up for saying the truth, your number's up for saying the truth. Number two, one would use the coarser way of explaining, the more universal way of explaining, to get to the more abstruse thing being explained, not the other way around. That's stupid. Okay, so all this to say, there are other influential people in those classrooms. I won't go through it, but I mean, Joe Bassett's the professor. We're talking to Kathleen Arndt and Tammy Bruce. There are other important people that go through Hillsdale and Claremont, and they're, at that time particularly, following upon the Bush years, and this is like 08, 09, 10. This is not 09, 10. People didn't realize how evil neoconservatism was. And so now when we kind of take a look back, we can say, what's the big picture? And to identify the big picture with Leo Strauss and the Straussians, you would say, there are basically two unifying themes that make somebody a Straussian. And it is the philosophy behind geopolitics called neoconservatism. But there are two unifying things. And within those two unifying themes, there are three ways you can parse it. So all Straussians believe that there is a fundamental inflection point in history, specifically the history of thought, between what's called capital A, antiquity, and capital M, modernity. This is not a Catholic view of the world, by the way. And that most of them, I think pretty much all of them, identify that inflection point in the person and the writings and the thinking of Machiavelli. And it's weird because when you read Strauss, you're like, okay, so they're saying Machiavelli is really important, which is nonsense. You know, the writer of The Prince, he's kind of a crass political philosopher that's pretty much just saying might makes right, and trickery helps you. Trickery counts as might. So this is nothing that we haven't seen in terms of Alcibiades. Some of the participants in the dialogues, the 37 dialogues of Plato, Alcibiades, and not just Glaucon, but who's the main one that's sort of a proto-Nietzsche figure. I'm forgetting his name now. We've seen this before. So why are you saying Machiavelli is important? Well, because he's the inflection point in the chronology in the history of thought between everything before that's ancient and everything after that's modern. And they're obsessed with this inflection point. And at times, Straussians will say that Machiavelli's bad because he's just saying might makes right, and you know, that political trickery should be used, chicanery. But at other times, the fact that they elevated him in importance, they're being more honest, that this is really all they believe in. And remember, Strauss thought that Plato and Aristotle, the two greatest metaphysicians in the history of the world prior to Thomas Aquinas, that they weren't even really doing a real metaphysics. They were just doing a fake metaphysics so that they could talk about politics and might and power and the philosophy of right and things like that, which is absurd. So really, they end up favoring Machiavelli, even if they claim to be disfavoring Machiavelli. And it's simply not true that the world, that even history, is divided between antiquity and modernity. Catholicism is the blue line that goes through all of it. And I don't even just mean Jesus and the Eucharist and the sacraments. Of course, that's true. I even mean the history of Catholic thought. I mean Aristotomism. That's what I mean by Catholic thought and proto-Catholic thought. Aristotle and Thomas are saying timeless things even about culture and politics, even about what might be called small government or subsidiarity or government, household economy. I cite Aristotle when I'm making the case for patriarchy, as much as I cite Thomas. And Aristotle lived 1,800 years before Thomas, and Thomas lived, 900 years ago, 850 years ago. There's a timelessness to the right ideas. So even though the Straussians claim to be conservatives who hate moral relativism, they don't. And their proof is that they have a hard line dichotomy, which turns out to be a false dichotomy through the chronology of the history of thought. And everything before Machiavelli has a giant A on it for antiquity, and everything after Machiavelli has a giant M on it for modernism. This is hot rubbish. and it conduces to it doesn't sound like much. I'll explain how it's worse. It conduces to a very dangerous view of the world. And the second thing they all believe is that all philosophy is esoteric. Now, since 2016, witchcraft, black magic, things we've all learned about, say, Marina Abramovich, we know esotericism is actually evil. It's another term for sort of hidden black magic, Jewish Kabbalah, Talmudic things, and we are dealing with Leo Strauss here. But as Strauss thought esotericism was a good thing. He thought this is how all philosophers write in codes to each other. He is the national treasure, if you will, of philosophers. He's not taken seriously. He's not taken seriously by philosophy academics. And I don't mean the corrupt liberal ones. I mean my Aristotomist mentor, Father Kevin L. Flannery. My Aristotomist mentors, Stephen Jensen, the ones that are current, would all say, "Ooh, stay away from Strauss. This is kind of Fugazi philosophy." It's like trying to learn history from the National Treasure movies. I love these movies, right? We've been going through them with our
I am not going to sit here and hear Nat Trizzy being disrespected.
They're fun movies, and they get shit on unduly because I find them more entertaining than Indiana Jones.
Okay, this is a tweet. That's your tweet.
My tweet there.
Yeah, National Treasure films are greater adventure films than the Indiana Jones series.
They're more fun. They're less boomer, less worship at the altar of World War II and things like that. Spielbergo. He's indoctrinating you. And I do like Harrison Ford. I think he's a cool leading man, but they're more boring movies than they get made out to be. Nevertheless, this doesn't really matter. National Treasure is better, and yet you don't learn history by National Treasure by being like history's encoded by the Masons, and it's kind of like doing history by Dan Browning. You don't Dan Brown your way through history. They make up the fact that everything's a code, and if you rub lemon sauce on the back of your menu, a giant G is going to show up, and you're going to find a Masonic treasure map.
Lemon sauce.
Whatever it's called. I love that. It makes a great movie. It's a better movie than in any Indiana Jones film. But that's not how history actually works. There is a thin blue line that runs through history. It's called, the one institution that has perennially true ideas and has onboarded even pre-Christian perennially and true ideas at the level of natural ideas, Aristotelianism, is Roman Catholicism. So we Catholics cannot accept an antiquity-modernity divide, and we sure as shooting cannot accept a view that says all metaphysics, all epistemology, all real philosophy reduces to philosophers esoterically winking and nodding to each other, and they all actually agree there's no such thing as metaphysics or epistemology. They're all just coming up with a National Treasure coded way of doing political philosophy so they don't get in much trouble, the way Socrates got in trouble or Neo gets in trouble in the Matrix. It's hot nonsense, okay? And this is why whether you take two very respectable legal academics, a good friend of Justice Scalia, the runner of the Originalism Center, Mike Rappaport, or Reaganite Thomas A.C. Smith, who's a very, very good man and a good Catholic, and a very smart man, and taught me much about the overlap between law and philosophy because he knows a lot about it. I think he's personal tutor to Brian Tierney, if I don't have that wrong. I mean, this guy's just avuncular and nice, the best of Idaho. He's an Idahoan. All of his brothers are like judges. He's just a good man and a serious Catholic. And they're all like, dude, stay away from the Straussians. Okay. In addition to the good man, Professor Father Kevin L. Flannery, one of the leading Thomists in the world. I mean, I'm lucky in who I've had as my mentor. I probably don't talk about this that much, but as legal and philosophical mentors, I'm very blessed. And they're all saying the same thing. They're three very different men, two of whom are Catholic. But they're all saying, okay, here's the thing. Thomas A.C. Smith is the one that told me this. If you want to understand the three kinds of Straussians in the world, there are three. There's what there's West Coast Straussians, there's Midwest Straussians, and there's East Coast Straussians. And they don't like being grouped into this grouping because they say Straussianism is a whole new world. There's all this disparity of viewpoint between us. Well, they all accept these two sort of happy premises. Happy premise number one, there's an antiquity-modernity divide. No one can get around it. The inflection point is Machiavelli. All the world is just crass politics. It sounds very relativistic. I mean, it just does. And happy premise number two, philosophy is basically fake. It's all just political philosophy. It's conveyed via esotericism, secret language, national treasure type language. But the real way to divide them is their only disparities are there are West Coast Straussians represented by Claremont, Claremont McKenna, Claremont Graduate University, and the Midwest Straussians were sometimes populating small places in the political department of Notre Dame and at Hillsdale College. That's a college devoted to Midwest Straussianism. And the East Coast Straussians are best represented by Alan Bloom, who wrote this mega-selling book called The Closing of the American Mind, I think in 1987. And the East Coast Straussians actually do have, they're more spotted. They don't have their own one university, but like Harvey Mansfield is at Harvard. There are some Ivy League East Coast Straussians, Columbia. There are a few. They're allowed. Why are these conservatives allowed to be in academia? Well, if you take the proposition, because of what I said, everything's either ancient or modern. Is that ancient or modern? Is that Dr. Pepper you're about to drink? Is that an ancient one or a modern one? The Lakers versus the Celtics. Well, the Lakers are an ancient team, though the Celtics are philosophically modern. They do this to everything. It's an obsession. It's a cult. That's what I said when I was at Claremont Graduate. I was like, holy cow, I'm in a Strauss cult. And I started realizing it. I started holding shop at, I made some friends there holding shop after class. And I'm like, guys, let me teach you real metaphysics. I've just studied this for years. I bounced around graduate programs. I have a master's, a PhD. I'm working on the PhD. Let me teach you real metaphysics. Since there are some Catholic guys, one of them's Chris Wolf, who's a professor, I think, at University of Dallas now. When you go through grad school, you know all these guys that are now professors. And I'm like, you cannot be a Thomist Straussian. That doesn't work. Here's why. I would hold shop in the classroom of Mark Blitz's Plato class after his class would end. And Kathleen Arn was sometimes there kind of listening, trying to pull her out of the cave that, daddy brought her into. That sounds weird. I don't mean it in like a weird molester way. I mean, like her dad is Larry P. Arn, and he's like pulling her into Straussianism and saying, go to Claremont if you're not going to go to Hillsdale. No weird molester stuff. Okay, so they all say of the two propositions that everything has to be ancient or modern, and they apply it to America, and therefore they'll have a view of America as either good or bad based on the two premises. So the West Coast Straussians say antiquity is good. And this is why they claim to be Aristotelians and even sometimes Thomists. Antiquity is good. America is ancient. Thus, just syllogisms. Thus, America is good. Antiquity is good. America is ancient in its philosophy. Thus, America is good. You see why, if you've read Catholic Republic, this comes in a sort of way the closest to my view of the world, my Thomistic view of, say, America. But I say there's no legit ancient modern divide. Everything is just Catholic, and the Catholic Church, particularly the Dr. Thomas, who onboarded Aristotle, they have all the right ideas. And the American founding fathers were, even though they're Protestant or secular Enlightenment thinkers, they were onboarding all these crypto-Catholic ideas, and therefore America really is crypto-Catholic. But I would never say ancient, because Catholicism and Thomism aren't just ancient, they're perennial, which is why it's called the perennial philosophy. If you believe it's the perennial philosophy, Thomism, which it is, and is pretty much right about everything, which it is, then you cannot say, well, this is an ancient worldview. And so Harry Joffe is a professor there at Claremont. He was very, very old, and he had many devotees there. And I was saying, look, yeah, this comes the closest to what I believe, but there is no esotericism in philosophy that's meaningful. Maybe the Al-Farabi wrote this way, and other Muslims so that they could study Aristotle and not have their books burned. It didn't work out for Averroes anyway, because that's what ended up happening. But you can't say this about true philosophy, and it's certainly not either ancient or modern. So the West Coast Straussians, where I was studying at Claremont, it was a hotbed of West Coast Straussian thought. America is ancient. Antiquity is good, therefore America is good. So they have this America is good kind of the most conducive to Catholic conservative thought, but it's still totally anathema to it. The Midwest Straussians at Hillsdale College, where probably a lot of you have been tempted or coaxed to send your college-age children, and some of whom were in some parts of the department at Notre Dame under Michael Zuckert, say America is modern, modernity is good, therefore America is good. Same conclusion, but they say America is modern and modernity is good. And then the East Coast Straussians, most notably Alan Bloom, there are many of them though. Alan Bloom taught antiquity is good, America's modern, therefore America is evil. And this view, again, it's not 100% wrong. My critique of modern America, post-Civil War America, shares many of these features, but you can't be on board with any of these because one like me, who's a true Thomist, doesn't buy any of these two premises. So that's that. So I'm trying to let you guys know that I'm going to go through some specifics in a second. That for one thing, you should mistrust this because there are so many. I'm going to read them to you now. Notable Straussians in American life. Who are the notable Straussians in American life? You'll recognize a lot of these names. Some of them you might not. Here's a New York Times article published in 2003. What is the story with Leo Strauss's students, the Straussians, who have so often been invoked and described since the end of the Iraq War that they have almost become an intellectual legend? They are viewed as a group of neo-conservative conspirators, as a small elite order guiding the Bush administration, in which path becomes crooked, providing it with a good conscience. How could you do that? They're actually relativists, decrying relativism. They can be found among the justices of the Supreme Court, and they work more actually at district level court, and they work at both the White House and the Pentagon. Okay, so I want you to be certain on that. But here are some of the notable Straussians. Some of the names will be better known to people that have spent time in academia. Some of them are notable at large. Alan Bloom, who's the author of The Closing of the American Mind. A lot of people who are maybe Gen X or older have probably read that book. It's not a bad book, from what I'm told. There's a lot of insight there, but it's pervasive, dripping with Straussianism. Harry Jaffa, Harvey Mansfield at Harvard, Thomas Pangle. Thomas Pangle did an amazing, what were those lectures called with, Michael Scott walks into the room with that fancy music, Steph? The Great American Lectures or something.
Oh yeah, the music. Yeah,
that. Remember those lectures around 08, 09, 10? Yes. Everyone was listening to those. I forget what they're called. Thomas Pangle did the one on the great debates of ratification. And he's a deep Straussian, but he did some great lectures. He's another prominent Straussian scholar, known for his interpretation of the classical texts in a Straussian way, and his work on the relationship between philosophy and politics. And he did some great actual fact-based coverage, like 9 lectures on the rivalry between the American Federalists and Anti-Federalists. There's another guy named Seth Benedetti, a philologist, a classical philologist, and a philosopher. He was one of the ones that talked about Plato and other classical thinkers. But again, well-known journalists like Irving Kristol, his son William Kristol. I'm going to play for you some clips from a William Kristol interview with Harvey Mansfield. I'll play a couple of those, and then I'm going to play more for the local supporters.
That's Bill Kristol?
Yeah, not Billy Crystal.
I know it's funny when I was making your thumbnail for this show, you were saying Bill Crystal, and I was spelling it.
Yeah, you're like
woman moment.
City
I was
Slickers.
like, I know that the guy from City Slickers is a Straussian.
Yeah, you're like that. That's almost impressive. I thought he was just some dumbass comedian.
It's like incredible. Here's Bill Crystal.
There's even a school of Straussians in China. That's hilarious. China. So there's, George Anastopoulos, Seth Benedetti, Walter Burns, Alan Bloom. And let's see. These are mainly political scientists who influenced the Bush admin. Alan Bloom.
I'm seeing like Catherine Zuckert, Michael Zuckert.
Both of the Zuckerts are Harry Jaffa, Pangl, Werner Dannhauser. A lot of people you'd be surprised. William Galston have been referred to as Straussians. Paul Wolfowitz, Deputy Defense Secretary under the Bush admin. Abram Scholsky. I mean, that sounds like just a character straight up out of the Old Testament.
That sounds like trouble.
Sounds like trouble. I mean, that's all you have to say. So here's one of the Straussians. Leo Strauss, Abram Scholsky. You can see why this is trouble. And now I want to get into some of that. So they have an outsized influence, even though there's really only 2, 3, 4 colleges where they have a conservative enclave in particularly the philosophy and political science departments. They were able to, does this sound like anyone? Like less than 2% of the population and you have an outsized political influence? Mm-hmm. Who does that sound like? Abram Scholsky. Who does that sound like? Leo Strauss said he came over from Germany and he was able to sit in on some of the lectures of Martin Heidegger. And he said, oh, they're so genius, I couldn't even understand them. And then Heidegger's a weird figure in the history of metaphysics who's setting out to defend the metaphysics from the Nazis. He was a Nazi party guy, sort of defended Nietzsche, and then and wanted to defend what's called continental philosophy from analytic philosophy. Guys like in analytic philosophy, like Rudolf Carnap, were trying to do away with metaphysics and just do philosophy from premises alone and not say Aristotle said this or Cicero said that. Analytic philosophy has its merits, but of course we believe metaphysics is the highest thing we can study within the 10 categories, which leads you right up to theology. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but
let's go back to Nat Trizzy.
Let's go back to National Treasure. No, it's important to note that there are all of these distinctions which fall out from the idea that there's an outsized influence not only in academia but in the American Congress, in American journalism. Yeah, none of these places are known as conservative, having much conservative influence. But to whatever extent they do, send your kid to Claremont if you're on the West Coast. Send your kid to Hillsdale College. Everyone who's conservative, which is like half the population or more in America, thinks that neoconservatism is conservatism because they have, among jurisprudes, legal scholars, not much pervasive influence among philosophers. We kind of mock them because they all teach philosophy sort of a joke, and it's all just reduces to political philosophy, which is really kind of dumb anyway. So it's interesting that Leo Strauss can say, I didn't even get Heideggerianism, and that's just a misunderstanding of Aristotelianism. That's all Heideggerianism is. But it's still higher level than Leo Strauss's pseudo-philosophy. He can say that, but at the same time, he immigrates to America, and then he's like, even though I couldn't even understand Martin Heidegger, now I'm going to start teaching everyone. I'm just teaching them that the whole 2,500-year history of philosophy is all about, basically the U.S. should defend Israel. and so it all kind of shakes out that way. It's a very small portion of academics, but they have an outsized influence. And if you're allowed to be a conservative in academia, the only kind of conservative you're allowed to be is a neocon. Doesn't this sound like the false It's false opposition that we're always talking about. So in specific ways, when it comes to not policy, but specific propositions of either philosophy or jurisprudence that I will take offense to. Number one, Straussianism is evil because it is the intellectual font of neoconservatism. The idea that the U.S. should be, and I can't go all the way through how and why do these premises in Strauss lead to the conclusion that the U.S. ought to be the world's policeman, by which we mean the policeman of the Middle East, and just make sure that Israel continues to exist no matter what. But that's what neoconservatism was. Moderate Keynesian political economists from the Democrat Party transferred in the late 70s to the Republican Party so long as they could be war hawks who were obsessed with defending Israel and sending them $3 billion plus per year. I don't like that. Neoconservatism is not conservatism, it's evil. Number two, I hate from, not so much from the position of philosophy, but from intellectual history. I hate this notion that there's a dichotomy between antiquity and modernity. It's not true sacramentally, because we as Catholics know that the Lord is the past, present, and the future. You know, like his devotees say about Voldemort, right? Right. I know a lot of Catholics will hate that, but they say Voldemort is my, what was it? Thomas Riddle will say Voldemort is my past, present, and future. Well, that's not true, because Voldemort's not real. You guys can get over it. But our Lord in the Eucharist is the past, present, and future. But I don't just mean sacramentally. I mean the perennial philosophy of Aquinas. Thomism, like Lord Voldemort, is the past, present, and future. He's my past, present, and future. And they're ideas that are neither ancient nor modern. And so it's stupid, if we're talking about intellectual history, to say, well, all ideas break down to either pre-Machiavelli or post-Machiavelli. Machiavelli is just some stupid political philosopher. You know, late Renaissance political philosopher. That's dumb. He's not even a real... I've never studied Machiavelli outside of undergrad in one of the many graduate philosophy departments I've studied in. And no one does this outside of Straussian. If you run into someone who says, I'm doing a dissertation on the philosophy of Machiavelli, it's like, he's like a historical figure. He's not a real philosopher. Oh, but if you call him a philosopher, you're probably a Straussian. That's a good tell right there. Number three, this is most offensive probably of all, the esoteric rejection of Plato and Aristotle's metaphysics. And I don't really care so much about Plato, but Aristotle, who gets it right and leads us right to Thomas with the intellectual heritage of form and matter, hylomorphism, the truth about the way that form and matter interact. It's absurd to say Aristotle cared more about politics, practical wisdom, than speculative wisdom. He orders that really, there's a taxonomy in Aristotle, and he's like, look, it's important to get in the Nicomachean Ethics, which is he calls just a introductory text for the politics. You would get ethics right as a function of the practical intellect, because it's an even more important function of the practical intellect to get politics right, and politics have to be moral. But it's just the practical intellect. The highest function of the speculative intellect is doing metaphysics, says Aristotle. And the metaphysics ends up not only solving the problem of philosophy, which is explaining change. Philosophy began outside of Athens, in places like Ephesus, you know, if you're talking about Heraclitus, the little kind of city-state islands outside of Athens, going up against the Parmenides and Thales and the other people that thought that the world was all made of one thing. And it was an attempt to explain, how do we reconcile change and stasis, becoming and being? The fact that some things seem to change, some things like numbers seem to stay the same. That's the advent of philosophy. And Aristotle pretty much solves it. And then Aristotle's on to the archaeology, metaphysics, God question. You get to books Lambda, Nu, and Mu of the metaphysics. And then there's pretty much no meaningful change from Aristotle, who solved all of Plato's problems and solved all of the false dichotomy of Parmenides versus Heraclitus, solved the problem of Greek philosophy. Philosophy really ended with Aristotle. He solved all the problems. But then he's getting at the end, the last few books of the middle and last few books of the metaphysics, he's bringing us right up to Thomistic metaphysics, Dante et Essentia. What's the relation? What's the nature between essence and existence? Catholic metaphysics. And you don't get any important change until Thomas. And that's why, you know, people will joke Aristotle deserves a green halo. He's basically doing the Holy Spirit's philosophy. He just can't, he's not equipped to do it until you get Aquinas. Okay, so it's offensive when you talk to a Straussian, particularly one who thinks they're Catholic or a Thomist, that thinks that it can be in any way palatable to say that Aristotle didn't really do metaphysics. This was just cover. So he could say that, like, there should be, you know, Alcibiades should not have to give up the throne or something. It's the stupidest shit you've ever heard. It's dumb. Number 4, it's Neo-Conservatism and Straussianism is falsely set up as the only conservative enclave in the modern American academy. I've already talked about that. They wouldn't allow a true conservative enclave in the modern American academy, which is why you can't even have Thomism at most Catholic schools. It's not even allowed at Jesuit schools. We need a special subclass of Catholic university, a subclass within a subclass of these Cardinal Newman schools to even be taught proper Aristo-Thomism. They don't even do it at Notre Dame or Georgetown. It's absurd, or Loyola Marymount. Number 5, most Straussians who are jurisprudents embrace the 14th Amendment. They embrace substantive due process. You've heard me rail against this in the show a couple days ago. They embrace Lincoln. That's the crazy thing. They say, oh, natural rights this, natural rights that, and they'll cite the Declaration of Independence, but they hate Jefferson because of slavery. And they're just boomers on this issue, but they love Lincoln. Lincoln's evil. You can't cite natural rights and get around Jefferson and then skip to Lincoln, who didn't even believe. Lincoln hated Christians. Lincoln didn't even believe in God. Lincoln hated Christians. Okay, so, you know, it's just you get into stupid problems with the 14th Amendment. You call yourself a conservative and you like the 14th Amendment? Okay, let's go through the jurisprudential history of the 14th Amendment. Everson versus Board of Ed, which turned around the idea that we had before the Everson versus Board of Ed, we actually had establishments of Christianity in American government. You know, and you go through the cases I was talking about the other day: Griswold versus Connecticut, Stanley versus Georgia, Roe versus Wade, Lawrence versus Texas, and Obergefell versus Hodges. These are all 14th Amendment cases. You can't be conservative and like the 14th Amendment, people. I think you know, I think this needs to be made clear, and that's why I'm doing shows on it in different ways. So 6, he hates Jefferson and loves Lincoln. Once one of my law professors, I won't say which one, I don't want to get him in trouble, said they're gay for Lincoln in a toga. That's what the Straussians are. They just put Lincoln in a toga. You know, Harry Jaffa would always say, oh, it's Athens, Rome, and Jerusalem that made Western civilization. No, man. It's Athens and Rome. It's Athens and Rome. It's not Athens, Rome, and Jerusalem. And it's not Lincoln. Lincoln has nothing to do with what's intellectually important or intellectually perennial. Number 7. Now I don't want to. I'm not the one-trick pony for this. But number 7, I'm just going to say it once and then be done with it. It's not my thing, but it is part of why Leo Strauss needs to be mistrusted. He's a secular Jew, and there is a pervasive Jewish subversion in all of this. Okay, I mean, the other people can talk more about that part, but I do agree with that. And it's clear that the really ingenious subversiveness of this. Oh, we're new conservatives, neocon, and we hate moral relativism. But we love Machiavelli's like the central figure in intellectual history. You're just relativists. But it's very crafty and very Jayish to say, oh, we're condemning this at the same time you're propping it up. They also favor the Federalist Papers over the Anti-Federalist Papers. That's number 8. You know I don't like that. And they in Hillsdale College, they'll teach the Federalist Papers, but they'll never teach them in dialogue because they're literally going back and forth. These papers are numbered, you know. You know, the 3 Federalist authors going synonymously as Publius, who were John Jay, who got sick and only wrote 6 or 7 of them, mainly James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, were writing under the pseudonym Publius. They're writing back and forth with George Clinton of New York and arguably maybe George Mason and one of the Lee brothers, who are going under these different anti-federalist names, Federal Farmer, Cato, Brutus. And they're writing letters back and forth. And it's really, really clear, if you've ever, people go out there and read the anti-federalist papers. They called exactly what would happen in America with this new constitution. If we go off the Articles of Confederation, we get this new big government consolidated constitution. Here's what's going to happen to the judiciary. They're going to sneak in laws. Here's what's going to happen with the proposed congressional power, known as the commerce power. They're going to sneak everything in through one line. They call it directly. So they will never teach the Federalist Papers together with the Anti-Federalist Papers, because the Anti-Federalists win. And we have the luxury of history to see they win. So they just bury it. Therefore, you don't even know they're Anti-Federalist Papers, a lot of you out there. This isn't all the fault of the Straussians, but they're definitely on board for that. So that's 8 things I hate about them. I think there's a movie called 10 Things I Hate About You. Yeah. Leo Strauss. Abram Scholsky. I hate your name. I mean,
I hate that.
I don't hate you as a person, but so these places like University of Dallas, Claremont, Hillsdale, beware. Very dangerous. Now, let me, do we have any, I mean, if you have any super chat questions, we'll gladly take them.
Let me read.
I have some clips by Harvey Mansfield explaining better than I can what he thinks a Straussian is and why it's good, because he's one of the most famous ones.
I'd like to show some of your local comments and have you respond to that, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, let me add these to the screen. All right, sir. So local supporters, Timothy, similar to how you laid out R for R, the book, I'm curious if you've thought about some new practical and pragmatic actions we as Catholic men can take to affect positive change in our country, community, municipality, and family.
Well, it all reduces to the 4 pillars of this channel, right? Patriarchy, men have to take back over their households. You just have to take it back, like a Rage Against the Machine song, like specifically the song track number 3 on their first album, Take the Power Back. That's the most important thing in society right now. The WQ, the woman question, is society's women have to be brought to heel. I'm not going to mince words there. They have to come back under control. And that's more important than even like, J-ish power. That might be important, and I'm learning more about that. But household by household, women have to be brought back to the place that not just Catholics believe God appointed for them, but all Christians. Mm-hmm. And they can't be brought back by a false Islamic Jewish mechanism known as the secular red pill. Because then that's easy to caricature. That's like a CIA. What do they call it? A false hangout. Is that what that's called?
Sure.
Nick and Candace were talking about it, like a fake hangout or a false hangout. Yeah. That's what that is. That's what the red pill is. Now, the red pill is all those guys are Jewish or Muslim in their thought and in their ethnicity. And it's sort of a fake device. They might locate all the problem. Women are out of control, but they don't understand the solutions, which are all Christian. Mm-hmm. So that's premise number 1. Men need to get their house under control. That's hard to do, and it takes a while, and it takes a bit of courage, and it takes a lot of action. Number 2, they have to understand that this country has to be Catholic, and it was Catholic when it worked, at least ideologically. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that it was mainly Catholics. It was mainly Protestants with some secular Enlightenment thinkers, but it has to be made Catholic. And I don't mean this in just some fashionable way because there's a great religious reawakening where people are becoming Catholic. I mean, I wrote the book on it. People have to understand not only that it's Catholic and people need to be converting, but they need to understand how the big ideas of America are actually Catholic and need to be enriched further and further with Catholicism. And if this was the country wired Catholic, labeled Protestant, and currently functioning secular, we need the labeling and the functioning to follow suit. Mm-hmm. And then the third one is education, re-education. You need to pull your kids not only out of public schools, but out of the Catholic schools. You need to be educating your kids with the kind of stuff that since you asked me, and this is point number 3, pillar number 3, I'm talking about every day. I mean, you don't need your kids being miseducated to false histories about things like World War II, post-war false histories and false sciences. I mean, you know, environmental science and all that crap that you keep your kid in school. It's just babysitting so that mom can work a job. Right. 8 hours a day. You need to be educating your own children. And if you feel unequipped to do that, well, I've told you I'll step into the fray. I want to do it. And this fall, I think I'm going to start offering a service that will be 9 to noon. You can literally live just have me do like a homeschool co-op for you. And that's really important. Notice how these aren't just like, oh, go to your local town hall. And then fourth, you know, we do need right-wing community organizing, which is kind of what you're doing right now by being part of the locals group. So do join locals, and we need this to be bigger. And someone like Nick Fuentes is doing a good job of getting a kind of large closed community together. So there's that.
Okay. Let's see, new comments. Let's see. Okay, next one. I'm curious how you would define prudent foreign policy for the U.S. I'm searching for someone to thread the needle between neocons and isolationists.
I don't think there is a thread between neocons and isolationists. I mean, isolationism is the starting point. And you should say, you know, even George Washington gave us basically an isolationist foreign policy. And you just say, yeah, you know, I mean, I don't know, go watch Nick Fuentes' debate with Dinesh D'Souza. I think he did a really able job there. And there's 2 separate questions. We should be, by our default, isolationist and just say, look, we don't really even need, we might have de facto allies in the world, but we never want to feel committed to our allies' political causes. And then if we're going to have them, you know, pre-World War II England makes a lot more sense than Israel. Then there are variant qualities of potential allies in the world, but we don't want to be tied to any. It's not like this isn't I mean, look, I'm Italian, so it's not like the Italian mob, like your enemies are my enemies, your friends are my. That's not how it works. It's babyish. We should default to isolationism, and if we ever are dragged into a foreign conflict again in 1,000 years, it ought to have a distinct benefit for Americans. So that is a 95% isolationism or better. But I can tell you that almost never would it be good to favor the nation state of Israel for several reasons. I mean, Pius X wrote this. He disallowed Catholics to favor Israel. He wrote this to Theodore Herzl, you know, like, look, we can't favor these people at this point in history after the things that went down about 2,000 years ago. Okay, so those are the starting points, and those are big ones. I don't know what you do outside of that, but educating your own kids at home is a big change. Getting we need, as a society, and this has to be done atom by atom, cell by cell, bringing women back under control. So they're not just running around yelling and carrying on in public, you know, having histrionics on display, on parade. That's really important. And then, of course, you know, you can ask someone like Nick Fuentes what he thinks about foreign policy. He's more equipped to say than I am. And there are others besides him that are more equipped to say, but I would just offer that. Educate your kids, have your wives under control, bring the gospel to everyone we meet. You can't really bring the gospel, though, even if you're trying to be a good Catholic guy, if your wife is out of control or your kids are out of control.
So true.
You can't do it. You have to, with the lay lifestyle, you have to lead by example. I almost sound like that boomer expression they attribute to St. Francis, like bring the gospel, use words if necessary. That's kind of true. You get all these more or less cuckolded beta men whose wives don't even listen to them, and they're trying to go around in men's groups and be like, look, I want to offer a fraternal correction. It's like, dude, STFU, your wife doesn't even listen to you. There's one person on earth that has the duty. In order for her to get to heaven, she has to do one thing. Jesus and St. Paul made this clear. She has to listen to you. You can't even get that. That should be the easiest soft pedal ever. You can't even get your wife to listen to you. Why would another man who doesn't have a duty to listen to you listen to you? And that's what all these Catholic men's groups are. You know, you think a young teenage male is going to listen to a guy like that? a big, doughy, flabby, effeminate, Catholic apologist whose wife is out there mocking him or whatever. I'm not talking about anyone specific. It's just all of them, and our priests for too many generations have been effeminate and are known not having wives, but having qualities like the wives, maybe sexual attractions like the wives. Like, we got a real problem. And so if you're not educating your own kids, if your wife doesn't listen to you, then that's a big problem. And flipping things around, all problems can be solved. All problems are solvable, particularly through Christ. But if you can't even begin to solve those around, people are like, well, don't we just need more men's groups with anti-prawn software? Or don't we need more messaging about how there should be less swearing in films? It's like, no, dude, you don't get it. You're not going to make it. Your wife needs to look up to you and be under control and obey you. And your kids need to have been educated by you, or they won't respect you if you farm out their education. Okay? Or they're not going to have the right ideas. So those are big tasks. When people ask me this stuff, then we can say community organizing and all this stuff. That's what this channel is trying to help you do. And I'm not even saying you have to do it all on your own. Ultimately, it's on your shoulders. But that's what this channel is there for. Help you educate your kids and to help you to see where a wife should fall, how a husband and wife should regard each other. We've written books, Case for Patriarchy, Ask Your Husband, Leave and Cleave. We offer 2x2 marriage coaching. We have a matchmaking service to begin relationships with the proper kind of person that won't be a difficult spouse to stay married to. I'm now, starting in the fall, basically going to be doing a homeschool co-op. If you're interested in that, homeschooling your kids so you can keep them home and learn. Maybe it takes 1, 2, 3 years to do, because I don't mind doing it for 3 years if I start, but learn how to homeschool them. We need to be turning, in some ways, more to the public sector and in some ways away from the public sector, but you got to do it the right way. We've been too public where we should have been private, and we've been too private where we should have been public.
Somebody is saying in chat that Nick is an isolationist. He is not an isolationist, excuse me. He is an imperialist.
Yeah, and that's where the main legitimate disagreement he has with me I'm going to bring him back on the show and talk about is, there's more kind of Hamiltonian quasi-imperialism thing there. And I'm a Jeffersonian. So there's, where I like subsidiarity. I say Catholic Church requires it. I don't picture big, grand, whatevers. I like the small Venice lasted 1,000 years as a republic. Malta lasted 1,200 years. The Swiss cantons lasted about 800 years. I just want to be left alone and have a little tiny Catholic republic. But I don't want the Catholic republic, and I want it to be institutionally established Catholic. I don't want it to be big, the size of a continent. That's book 5 of Plato's Republic stuff. That's globalism stuff. Imperialism is globalism. I'm not saying Nick's a globalist, but I'm just saying this is our one legitimate disagreement is Hamilton versus Jefferson. And that's, we'll make for a great conversation when I bring him back on. I want a little Catholic republic where everyone follows the laws because everyone already believes the laws. And I do believe pluralism is nonsense. He believes that too. I would say that the worldview of imperialism and Hamiltonianism, which likes big geographic land masses. I always say this: you can't believe that pluralism is nasty and a myth and bad for the way that polities should work if you believe that land masses. You can't believe that pluralism is bad if you believe land masses should be good. So to have the correct political ideology, which I think he has, you have to have the correct political geography. You can't have one without the other. You can't say, I want the club to be really pure. I want, a res publica means we don't have pluralism. We have all one kind of person. We all have Catholics, You know, Catholics that believe a certain kind of Catholicism and want to be a certain kind of citizen, and there's even an ethnic component and all this. Well, okay, that means you're making the club smaller to make it purer. You don't make a club purer as you make it bigger. That's impossible. It's literally impossible. So if you're like, man, we started this, I don't know, dorky comic book club in our treehouse. And you know what? Too many of the members aren't real comic book lovers. They don't really, I hate comic people, but they don't really love the X-Men, right? Is that one of them? They don't even know much about Dr. X-Man or whatever. We need to make it purer. Well, you don't make it bigger. When you say we want to make a republic purer, ideologically, or for Nick, it's ideologically plus, ethnically, or whatever, racially, whatever your version of purism is, there is an axiom that you can't get around. You don't get the club or the republic or the even monarchy. You don't get the polity purer by making it larger. And the idea from the whole Aristotelian, Suarezian, Bellarminian, Thomistic lineage of political philosophy, they all say one thing: to have a truly Catholic polity, it must be small. And that's what Pius XI encoded in our teaching. Just tell me. I'll wait. Someone debate me. Someone debate me on this in a super chat. How do you make your comic book club purer while getting bigger? You make it purer by saying, you're out, you're out, you're out, you're out. It's only me and my buddy, the founding members, that really love Dr. X or whatever. Or the Wolverine. Is that one of them?
I can't believe what you would say.
The Wolverine, Dr. X, like whatever. The Incredible Hulk.
Let's get back to serious matters like the Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, seriously.
That's serious matters.
You see what I'm saying? So that's the one thing, I think that's the one major identifiable thing I think he and I disagree about. And I love to talk to him again, and we have a plan to talk about that. That's Jeffersonianism, and that's just it's ironic because Jefferson was this gay Francophile and secular when it came to religion, but he had for incidental reasons, he had the correct worldview on subsidiarity. And lots of Jeffersonians who were not anti-religious also shared the correct worldview, which is why it's called Jeffersonianism. It's just a fact. And if you want to debate anybody in chat, let's talk about how you make a club at the same time purer and bigger.
Somebody said Holy Roman Empire was an empire, but still had subsidiarity, and we can have our cake and eat it too.
No, Holy Roman Empire. Okay, so this is just a failed understand. Look, let's go through it. The Holy Roman Empire did not have the police. I'm talking about the police power. The police power means the ability to regulate health, safety, welfare, and morals. That was left to the individual. This is what confuses people about history that haven't studied this stuff in depth. There was not one police power for that's just globalist. So just say I'm a globalist. I'm a right-wing globalist. If that's what you believe. The Holy Roman Empire, Charlemagne, Charles Martel. I mean, I'm a church history teacher. These guys did not have, together with the empire, the emperor ruled for in the East for most of remaining Rome. We got a kind of Western emperor with Charlemagne and a Western-like emperor with the return with the Carolingians. This never represented a police power coming that was empire-wide. That's absurd. That would be globalism. That's evil. No, in the Holy Roman Empire, we did not have our police power cake and eat it too. They all had their own laws. Okay, so when you put it in the modern context, something like abortion, okay, I don't like abortion. But we overturned Roe versus Wade with Dobbs, and that gave the power back to the actual republics. Who are the republics? The states. I'm as responsible for an abortion that takes place in Honolulu, Hawaii, about 4,000 miles from where I'm sitting, as I am for an abortion that takes place in Paris, France, which is probably 3,800 miles, probably actually closer to Paris than I am to Honolulu. Do you understand that? I pray for the baby. I pray abortion winds up, closes out all over the world. I'm only responsible for my republic where I live as a citizen. Whether it's a monarchy or an aristocracy or a polity, democracy is gay. Do you understand that? And so it's impossible unless you're a globalist and you're a Tavistock kind of, I don't know, Epstein, Bill Gates, Anthony Fauci globalist. It's impossible that we're accountable morally for something, and whether it's a polity or a monarchy, for what goes on in another part of the world. It's only pretty much, that's why all of our terms revolve around the city. All political terms revolve around polis. Why? Because a polis, or a neighborhood, is what I was saying. Having the right political ideology cannot be separated from having the right political geography. They are inextricable. And this is what Pius XI teaches in Quadragesimo Anno. It's about the size of a city, hopefully a small city. That's what the Greek city-states were when they worked. If you're accountable morally for what goes on in your polity, it's got to be basically polis-sized, like neighborhood-sized. Then you can be expected to be alike with all the other people. If you have 1/3 of a billion people in your polity, I can't even say it without laughing, you don't really believe that you're going to be alike all those people. There aren't 1/3 of a billion people that are like me in the world. And this is what, because I am a Christian nationalist, I just believe nations should be small. This is what Christian nationalism has to deal with. And this is one of the major confrontations I have to kind of force within Christian nationalism. I am a Christian nationalist. It's got to be small, though. There are not 1/3 of a billion people in the world like me or Nick, or like my friends. It's a small class. It's what Aristotle called a few and a many problem. And therefore, and even if there were 1/3 of a billion people, which is like what the United States is, you can't have a real political participation in a continent-sized government. That's just globalism. There are so many problems with this conceptually, and trust me, political philosophy is easy. Metaphysics is hard. Political philosophy is easy. Same thing I was saying about Strauss. You can't do this. These are not problems that can be worked out. They're logical antinomies. So I am a Christian nationalist, but nations have to be small. And if you believe in purifying your polity, that means, okay, we got to have like a city-sized country. And then we can have all people that like Twix, but not Kit Kat. We can have Catholics. We can have, this color. We can have this preference. You could do that if you're willing to tighten your borders. You can't do that if you're like, well, we should have, we should have a continent. So we should have 1/4 of the people in the world. That's stupid. There aren't that many people that agree with us.
Let's see. Local supporter said, what problems do your friends from Louisiana have with the state aside from degeneracy of New Orleans? Some friends and I are considering the establishment of a self-sustaining Catholic community in academia.
I mean, it's just, there's the problem is the, political decadence of, New Orleans is a very, very urban Black place. You don't want your state to be controlled by urban Black politics. I don't know what other problems you could have with it, but you want to be in a place that's not controlled by those kind of race huckster politics. And Louisiana, in some ways, is the coolest state because it's in some ways the most Catholic. The only state that ever had Napoleonic code instead of common law in its jurisprudence. And yet, what is it? But I mean, the state's politics are all governed by Baton Rouge and New Orleans, and it's very urban Black, and so it's at best a purple state. Even though you got a bunch of cool conservative Catholics in places like Lafayette and Lake George and the southwest part of the state.
Catholic Crusader said, how are we going to defend against great political powers like China if we're all extremely small?
So this is the myth of history of really Lincoln and Marx, who were friends, pushing this view of history. And Madison kind of pushed an early version. Madison and Hamilton together pushed a version of this in Federalist 10. China doesn't, across the world, particularly if you have the geographical luxury of being across the world. Have you seen Malta have major incursions by anyone? No one messes with Malta. For 1,000 years, no one messed with Venice until you add big Marxist forces like Garibaldi and his best friend Lincoln forcing Venice into the Italian Risorgimento, also forcing the Vatican into the Risorgimento. I mean, the church is on my side here in its teachings on this. This is why Pius IX was so friendly to the American Confederates. China doesn't mess with Malta. Why would they mess with Mississippi if Mississippi were recognized as a country? Everyone throws Federalist 10 at you. Oh, well, we need faction to control more faction. We need a huge continent-sized country so that we don't get messed with. I mean, maybe if we were on the border of the most belligerent nation in the world or something, some nations are more belligerent than others. History proves this. Japan's 25 times more belligerent than China. Japan was always incurring into China. China, it's not the same way the other way around. But so yeah, it's just not true. The Swiss cantons survived for 1,200 years as their own little small government where they didn't have to deal with diversity and all that. It was just one kind of person. No one messed with them. Same thing with Malta. Same thing with Venice. Same thing with even Little England. Never got messed with. Never got messed with. England was a little republic for 1,000 years.
Continuing on with the locals' comments, are there any laws that are supposed to prevent politicians from building fortunes like they have in the stock market because of their position of influence? He goes on to say, I have family members, specifically boomers, who have no problem with companies like BlackRock buying up single-family homes and residential property to rent it out because they believe it saves property owners from potentially housing market crashes from lack of demand or affordability. Let's see here.
So I don't like that. I'm with you. No one likes that. I'm surprised they do. But those are problems more of political geography than political ideology. It's something I talk a lot about subsidiarity. I probably need to start talking about it more. That kind of stuff only goes on in a country the size of, a continent, which is a joke. To have a continent-sized republic is a contradiction in terms. Whereas if your country's the size of your city, then that kind of stuff just can't happen. Mm-hmm. And there's a better answer that's more on point, but I would have to research it some. I don't like BlackRock. That's bad. It's evil. We don't want them buying up our land, but I don't know the laws on it all that well.
And then he asks, is the military-industrial complex legal?
Just the idea that there's a generative commodifying force to war, that war creates wealth. That's not illegal. That's just a Eisenhowerian view of history. So no, that's not illegal. It's just when we're talking about international sovereign diplomatic immunity principles and internationalist principles, we have to redefine what's legal or illegal anyway, but it doesn't even circumscribe a given set of acts. All it means is it's a worldview, and it's seems to be descriptive more than prescriptive. It's just saying pretty much wars will always be crypto incentivized by a certain kind of elite industrial class because it enriches them. It can't be illegal. Okay, so I will play the Harvey Mansfield clips behind the scenes for locals only, and just cut there. Hopefully this was a decent show on the Straussians. I mean, it's a weekend show, so it can be a bit more informative. It's important because a lot of people are being coaxed by mainstream conservative media to send your kids to places where Leo Strauss reigns as king, the Neo-Conseratives. God bless you guys all. I can't get over this mini cold since we got back from vacation. Do consider, please, supporting us on Rules for Retrogrades .locals.com. Where did I put this? Rules for Retrogrades.locals.com. Tomorrow I'm doing a show that'll be a big show. 5 takeaway principles from the Candace Nick interview. I watched it all until late last night, and it was very interesting in a number of ways. Everyone's talking about it now on Twitter. I'm going to do 5 takeaways. It's going to be, I think, a unique voice on what happened there. God bless you all.